On the parched edge of the Texas frontier, a young woman stumbles through the dust, with nothing but the child growing in her belly and hope flickering in her heart. Nora Wells has walked away from a life that nearly broke her, carrying secrets that could destroy the fragile future she's trying to build. When wealthy cattleman Cole Maddox finds her collapsed near his ranch, he makes a decision that will change both their lives forever. Cole has spent years building walls around his heart, protecting himself from the pain that nearly destroyed him when he lost his wife and child. But something about this desperate young mother awakens feelings he thought were buried forever. As Nora finds strength in his quiet kindness and Cole discovers purpose in protecting her, neither realizes that her past is about to catch up with them. Will love be enough to overcome the forces threatening to tear them apart? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Cole Maddox had been riding the northern boundary of his ranch when he spotted the crumpled figure beside the dusty road. At first glance, he thought it might be discarded clothing caught on the sagebrush, but something about the way the fabric moved in the breeze made him pull his horse to a stop. The sun was merciless that afternoon, beating down on the Texas plains with the kind of heat that could kill a man if he wasn't careful. He dismounted slowly, his weathered boots crunching on the sun-baked earth. The woman lay curled on her side, one arm protectively wrapped around her swollen belly, the other stretched toward a pair of worn leather boots that had apparently fallen from her feet. Her dress, once perhaps a cheerful blue, was now faded and torn, stained with dust and what looked like days of travel. Dark hair clung to her face, damp with perspiration and exhaustion. Cole knelt beside her, noting the rise and fall of her chest, shallow but steady. She was alive, though barely conscious. Her lips were cracked and pale, her skin bearing the telltale flush of heat exhaustion. But it was her condition that made his breath catch. She was heavy with child, perhaps, 7 or 8 months along, and clearly had been walking for some time. "Mom!" His voice was gentler than he'd used in years, rusty from disuse in anything approaching tenderness. "Mom, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds, gray with flecks of blue that spoke of intelligence and spirit, even in her weakened state. She tried to speak, her lips moving soundlessly before she managed a whispered, "Please." Cole had built his reputation on quick decisions and unwavering resolve. In 34 years of life, he'd learned that hesitation could cost a man everything: his cattle, his land, sometimes his life. But this decision felt different, weighted with implications he couldn't quite name. He'd avoided complications, especially those involving women, for the better part of 5 years. His ranch house had been a sanctuary of solitude, exactly the way he preferred it. Yet looking down at this young woman, seeing the way her hand instinctively protected her unborn child, even in unconsciousness, something stirred in his chest that he'd thought long dead. "You're safe now," he said. More to himself than to her. He gathered her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt despite her condition. Her head fell against his shoulder, and he caught the faint scent of lavender beneath the dust and exhaustion, a reminder that she'd once known gentler circumstances. The ride back to his ranch house took 20 minutes, Cole keeping his horse to a careful walk despite his growing concern for the woman's condition. She drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring words he couldn't make out. Once, she gripped his shirt with surprising strength and whispered, "Don't let him find me," before falling back into unconsciousness. Cole's ranch sprawled across 15,000 acres of prime Texas grassland, with a main house that reflected both his success and his solitary nature. Built of native stone and timber, it was large enough for a family, but had housed only him and his housekeeper, Maria, for the past 3 years. Maria Gonzalez had worked for the Maddox family since Cole was a boy, and at 62 she possessed both the wisdom to know when to speak and the discretion to know when silence served better. She met him at the front door, before he'd even dismounted, her dark eyes taking in the situation with characteristic efficiency. "Dios mío," she breathed, crossing herself. "Bring her to the blue room, senor. I'll get water and clean linens." Cole carried the woman upstairs to the guest room that hadn't been used in years. The afternoon light filtered through lace curtains his late wife had chosen, casting gentle shadows across the polished wooden floor. He laid the woman carefully on the bed, noting how she immediately curled into herself, one hand still protecting her belly. "She's with child," Maria observed quietly, appearing at his elbow with a basin of cool water and soft cloths. "Perhaps 7 months, maybe 8. She's been walking a long time, senor. Look at her feet." Cole glanced down and felt anger rise. In his throat, the woman's feet were torn and bleeding, evidence of long miles traveled in inadequate footwear. Her worn leather boots, which he'd retrieved from the roadside, were split along the sides and offered little protection from the harsh terrain. Who would let a woman in her condition walk alone in this heat, he asked, though the question was rhetorical. He'd seen enough of the world to know that cruelty took many forms, and sometimes desperation drove people to choices that seemed impossible to understand. "Someone who didn't deserve her," Maria replied simply, beginning to clean the woman's face with gentle strokes. "We'll care for her now, senor. It's what your mother would have wanted." Cole nodded, though something tightened in his chest at the mention of his mother, another woman who'd believed in showing kindness to strangers. He watched Maria work for a moment, then quietly left the room, closing the door behind him. Downstairs, in his study, he poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and stared out the window at the land that had been his life's work. He told himself that keeping to himself was safer, that avoiding attachments meant avoiding pain. Yet here he was, with a mysterious woman upstairs who'd already begun to stir something he'd thought permanently buried. Outside, the Texas sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Tomorrow, he'd need answers. Tonight, he'd settle for keeping her alive. Nora Wells awakened to the sound of wind chimes dancing in a gentle breeze. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. The sensation of clean sheets against her skin, the scent of lavender and beeswax, the distant lowing of cattle. Then memory crashed back. The endless walking, the sun beating down mercilessly. The moment when her legs simply refused to carry her another step. She sat up carefully, one hand instinctively moving to her belly, where the baby stirred restlessly. The room around her was unlike anything she'd known in recent months. Polished wooden floors gleamed in the morning light, and delicate lace curtains framed windows that looked out over rolling pasture land. A pitcher of fresh water sat on the bedside table, along with a small hand mirror and a wooden cross that hadn't been there when she'd collapsed. The cross made her breath catch. It was simple, carved from what looked like oak, with a leather cord worn soft from handling. She picked it up with trembling fingers, recognizing the weight and texture immediately. It had been her mother's, the only thing of value Nora had managed to keep through all her troubles. Seeing it here, carefully placed where she would notice it immediately upon waking, told her that someone had gone through her few possessions with care rather than mere curiosity. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Senora, are you awake?" The voice was warm, accented with Spanish inflections that spoke of kindness and competence. "Yes," Nora called softly, pulling the sheet up to her chin despite being fully clothed in what appeared to be a clean nightgown. An older woman entered, carrying a tray that filled the room with the rich aromas of coffee, bacon, and fresh bread. She was perhaps 60, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that held both wisdom and warmth. "I am Maria," the woman said, setting the tray on a small table near the window. "I helped Senor Maddox with the house. You gave us quite a scare, Misha. How are you feeling?" Nora tried to assess her condition honestly. Her head no longer pounded with the relentless ache of dehydration, and her limbs felt steadier than they had in days. "Better," she admitted. "Much better, thank you. I should go. I don't want to impose." Maria's expression grew stern in the way that only older women could master. "You will do no such thing. You are in no condition to travel, especially carrying a child. Senor Maddox has given strict orders that you are to rest and recover." The mention of her rescuer brought a flush to Nora's cheeks. She remembered strong arms lifting her, a gentle voice telling her she was safe, the careful way he'd carried her, despite being a complete stranger. "He was very kind," she said quietly. "I don't even know his full name." "Cole Maddox," Maria supplied, bustling around the room with practiced efficiency. "He owns this ranch and most of the land you can see from that window. A good man, though he's been too alone these past years." She paused in her movements, studying Nora with shrewd eyes. "He found you on the North Road. You'd been walking a long time, see?" Nora nodded, not trusting her voice. The kindness in Maria's manner made her want to weep, a luxury she hadn't allowed herself in months. "I was heading to San Antonio," she managed. "I heard there might be work there." "Work?" Maria's eyebrows rose. "Mija, you are ready to have a baby any day now. What kind of work could you do?" The question hung in the air, and Nora realized how foolish her plan had been. She'd been running on hope and desperation, with no real plan beyond putting distance between herself and the life she'd fled. I hadn't thought that far ahead." Maria's expression softened. "What is your name?" "Child? Nora Wells." The surname felt strange on her tongue now. It belonged to a version of herself that felt like a distant memory. "Well, Nora Wells, you are welcome here as long as you need to stay. Senor Maddox made that very clear. Now you will eat, and then we will see about getting you some proper clothes. That dress you arrived in is barely holding together." As if summoned by the mention of clothes, a tap came at the door. "Maria, is our guest awake?" The voice was deep, careful, tinged with an accent that spoke of Texas born and bred. Nora's heart quickened inexplicably. "Come in," Maria called. "She is much better this morning." Cole Maddox entered the room, and Nora saw him clearly for the first time. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair that showed traces of grey at the temples, and eyes the colour of deep water. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked by lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. He wore simple working clothes, denim pants, a cotton shirt, and boots that had seen honest labour. "Miss Wells," he said, removing his hat with an old-fashioned courtesy that made her chest tight. "I'm glad to see you're feeling better. You gave us quite a worry." "Mr. Maddox," she replied, struggling to sit up straighter, "I can't thank you enough for your kindness. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "Anyone would have done the same," he said quietly, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. An awkward silence stretched between them until Maria cleared her throat. "Senor, perhaps you could ask Tom to bring up the trunk from the storage room. I think some of the things in there might fit Senora Wells, at least until we can make other arrangements." Cole nodded, his gaze lingering on Nora for a moment longer than necessary. "Of course. And Miss Wells, please don't worry about anything except getting your strength back. You're safe here." After he left, Nora found herself staring at the closed door, her hand unconsciously moving to the wooden cross that lay warm against her palm. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that safety might be more than just a beautiful dream. 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt almost like normalcy. Nora found herself settling into the gentle routine of ranch life with an ease that surprised her. Each morning, she awakened to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant voices of ranch hands beginning their day. Maria would arrive with breakfast and cheerful conversation, followed by Cole's careful inquiry about her health. Always polite, always concerned, but maintaining a respectful distance that spoke of his natural reserve. On the 4th morning, Nora felt strong enough to venture downstairs. The main floor of the house revealed the same understated elegance as her room, with furniture that spoke of quality rather than ostentation. In the parlor, a stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel bare except for a single candlestick and what appeared to be a small face-down picture frame. She found Cole in the kitchen, sharing coffee with Maria and discussing the day's work. He rose immediately when she entered, pulling out a chair with the same old-fashioned courtesy he'd shown from the beginning. "Good morning, Miss Wells. Maria tells me you're feeling much stronger." "Please call me Nora," she said, settling carefully into the offered chair. "And yes, I feel almost human again. I was wondering—" She hesitated, not wanting to presume, but needing to contribute something to her keep. "Is there anything I could help with? Light work, perhaps? I hate being idle when everyone else is working so hard." Cole and Maria exchanged a glance that held entire conversations. "Misha," Maria said gently, "you are carrying a child. Rest is not idleness, it's necessity." "But I feel fine now," Nora insisted. "And I'm used to keeping busy. Back home, She caught herself before finishing the sentence, not ready to reveal too much about the life she'd fled. Cole leaned back in his chair, studying her with those thoughtful eyes. "What kind of work did you do before?" he asked carefully. Nora rapped, her hands around her coffee cup, drawing warmth from the ceramic. "I kept house, tended a garden, helped with the harvest when needed. My mother taught me to sew and cook. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Maddox." "Cole," he corrected automatically, "and I don't doubt your willingness to work, but Maria's right. Your condition requires care." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something, "though I suppose if you're determined to keep busy, there might be small things. The vegetable garden behind the house could use attention, nothing strenuous." Maria clicked her tongue disapprovingly, but Nora felt a surge of relief. Being useful meant having purpose, and purpose made her feel less like a charity case. After breakfast, Cole showed her around the immediate grounds of the ranch house. The vegetable garden was indeed overgrown, clearly neglected since the previous growing season. Tomato plants struggled against weeds, and herb beds had become wild tangles of mint and sage. "My wife planted this," Cole said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Nora glance at him sharply. "She had a gift for making things grow. After she—" He cleared his throat. "Well, Maria and I haven't had much time for it." It was the first time he'd mentioned a wife, and Nora felt something twist in her chest, not quite jealousy, but a recognition of loss that resonated with her own experiences of losing precious things. "What was her name?" she asked softly. "Catherine." "Katie." His voice softened when he said it. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said a person's worth could be measured by how they treated those who couldn't help them in return." The comment carried layers of meaning that made Nora's cheeks warm. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders were coming up the main drive, moving at an easy pace that suggested a social visit rather than urgent business. "The Hendersons," Cole said, his tone shifting to something more guarded. "Our neighbors to the east." Nora instinctively stepped closer to Cole as the riders approached. The lead rider was a man of perhaps 45, with the bearing of someone accustomed to respect. Beside him rode a woman of similar age, elegantly dressed despite the practical demands of riding, and a younger woman who might have been their daughter. "Cole!" the man called out as they drew near. "Hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced. Martha brought some of her apple preserves, and we thought we'd check on how you're managing with the drought." Cole's posture had subtly changed, becoming more formal. "Always welcome, William. Martha, Susan." He nodded to each in turn. "I'd like you to meet Miss Nora Wells. She's been recovering from heat exhaustion." The introduction was carefully neutral, but Nora felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes, assessing her appearance, her condition, her presence at Cole's ranch. Martha Henderson's gaze lingered on Nora's obviously pregnant form, with barely concealed curiosity. "How lovely," Martha said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Are you traveling alone, dear?" The question carried undertones that made Nora's spine straighten. "I am," she replied simply, offering no additional explanation. "How brave of you," Susan Henderson added, her tone suggesting bravery might not be the word she'd have chosen privately. Cole stepped slightly closer to Nora, a movement so subtle she might have imagined it. "Miss Wells will be staying with us until she's fully recovered," he said firmly. "Maria and I are happy to help." The conversation continued for several more minutes, polite on the surface but charged with undercurrents that spoke of a small community's interest in anything unusual. When the Hendersons finally took their leave, promising to stop by again soon, Nora felt drained in a way that had nothing to do with her physical condition. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, as they watched the riders disappear down the drive. "I didn't mean to create gossip for you." Cole turned to look at her, and for a moment his carefully maintained distance seemed to waver. "Nora," he said, using her given name for the first time, "you have nothing to apologize for. People will talk regardless. What matters is doing what's right." That evening, as Nora sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, she found herself thinking about Catherine Maddox and the woman who'd planted the garden with such love. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd begin bringing that garden back to life. It seemed like the least she could do to honor both the woman who'd created it and the man who'd given her sanctuary. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a rider who claimed to be passing through on his way to San Antonio. Cole accepted it with the casual indifference of a man accustomed to correspondence about cattle prices and land deals, but something about the messenger's nervous glances toward the house made him pause before opening it. The paper was cheap, the handwriting crude but forceful, pressing so hard into the page that some letters had torn through. Cole's expression darkened as he read, his jaw tightening with each line. "Maddox, word is you got something that belongs to me. A woman, brown hair, carrying my child. She's my lawful wife, and she stole from me when she ran. The law's on my side. Send her back, or I'll come collect her myself. You don't want that kind of trouble." J. Briggs Cole read the letter twice, his hands steady despite the cold anger building in his chest. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his vest pocket, then walked slowly toward the house where he could hear Nora's laughter mixing with Maria's as they worked in the kitchen. He found them preparing vegetables for the noon meal. Nora, seated at the large wooden table with a bowl of green beans in her lap. She looked up when he entered, and her smile faded immediately at the expression on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her hands stilling in their work. Cole pulled out a chair across from her, his movements deliberate and controlled. "I received a letter this morning from someone claiming to be your husband." The bowl of green beans tumbled from Nora's lap, scattering across the floor as her face went white. Maria immediately moved to her side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. What did it say?" Nora's voice was barely a whisper. Cole withdrew the letter, smoothing it flat on the table. "He calls himself J. Briggs, says you're his lawful wife, that you stole from him, and that he wants you back." Nora's hands flew to her throat, and Cole saw them trembling. "How did he find me? I was so careful." She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. "I have to leave, tonight. If he knows I'm here, he'll come, and I won't let him hurt anyone else because of me." "Sit down," Cole said firmly, but not unkindly. When she remained standing, he rose and gently guided her back to her chair. "Tell me about this man. Tell me why you're so afraid." For a long moment Nora sat in silence, her hands pressed protectively over her belly. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow with remembered pain. "His name is Jeremiah Briggs, and I was never truly his wife, though he convinced me I was. I was 17 when my parents died in a fever outbreak. I had nothing, no family, nowhere to go. Jeremiah found me at their funeral and offered marriage. He seemed kind then, respectable. Had a small farm outside of Austin." She paused, gathering strength to continue. It wasn't until after the ceremony that I learned he already had a wife. The marriage wasn't legal. He'd used false papers, a fake name, but by then I was trapped. He kept me like a prisoner, told me if I ever tried to leave, he'd have me. Arrested for theft and adultery. Maria crossed herself and muttered something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. When I realized I was carrying his child, Nora continued, something changed in me. I couldn't let this baby grow up in that house, with that man's violence and cruelty. So I waited until he went to town one day, took only what I could carry and ran. Cole's hands had slowly clenched into fists as she spoke. Did he hurt you? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. Nora's silence was answer enough. He's not your husband, Cole said finally. A false marriage performed under false pretenses has no legal standing. You're free of him. You don't understand, Nora said desperately. Legal standing doesn't matter to a man like Jeremiah. He believes he owns me, owns this baby. He'll never stop looking, and he'll hurt anyone who gets in his way. Cole stood and walked to the window, staring out at his land while his mind worked through possibilities. How did he track you here? I don't know. I stayed off main roads, avoided towns where possible. Maybe someone saw me, remembered. She trailed off, fear making her voice thin. The Hendersons, Maria said suddenly. They ask many questions when they visit. And Martha, she talks to everyone in town. Cole nodded grimly. Probably innocent curiosity that became dangerous gossip. He turned back to Nora. But you're not leaving. Running didn't solve this problem before, and it won't. Solve it now. A man like Briggs will keep hunting until he's stopped. You don't understand what he's capable of, and he doesn't understand what I'm capable of, Cole interrupted, his voice carrying a steel edge that made even Maria look up sharply. This is my land, my home. No one threatens what's under my protection. That night, Cole sat alone in his study, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. On his desk lay the threatening letter, and beside it, a response he'd written in his own firm hand. Tomorrow he'd send word to Sheriff Morrison, but tonight he'd make preparations of his own. Some problems required more than legal solutions. Sheriff. Jake Morrison arrived at the Maddox Ranch 2 days later, his weathered face grim beneath the brim of his hat. Cole met him on the front porch, noting the way the lawman's hand rested casually near his sidearm, a habit that spoke of years dealing with dangerous men. Cole, Morrison said, dismounting with the careful movements of a man who'd spent too many years in the saddle. Got your message about this Briggs fellow. Thought you'd want to know what I found out. They settled into the porch chairs, and Morrison accepted a cup of coffee from Maria before pulling a small notebook from his vest pocket. Jeremiah Briggs, he began, flipping through pages. Real piece of work, from what I can gather. Had a farm outside Austin like your Miss Wells. Said, but he lost it last year for unpaid taxes. Since then, he's been drifting, taking odd jobs, making trouble. Cole's jaw tightened. What kind of trouble? The kind that involves women who can't fight back, Morrison replied bluntly. There's been complaints in 3 different counties. Women, claiming he married them under false pretenses, took what they had, then disappeared. None of them pressed charges, though. Too scared, I'd guess. So he's done this before. Multiple times, and that's not the worst of it. Morrison leaned forward, his voice dropping. I sent a wire to a friend of mine who works out of Austin. Seems our Mr. Briggs has warrants out for theft, fraud, and assault. Real warrants, not the kind he threatened Miss Wells with. Relief flooded through Cole, followed immediately by renewed concern. So she's safe from prosecution. But he's still dangerous. More dangerous than she probably knows. Jake, my contact in Austin, says Briggs has been asking questions around there about a pregnant woman heading west, offering money for information. That kind of desperation usually means a man's at the end of his rope, as if summoned by their conversation. Nora appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. Sheriff Morrison, I heard you'd come. Is there news? Morrison rose respectfully, removing his hat. Ma'am, nothing you need to worry about. Just discussing some legal matters with Cole here. Please don't treat me like a child, Nora said firmly, moving to stand beside Cole's chair. This is my life, my danger. I have a right to know what we're facing. Cole looked up at her, struck by the quiet strength in her voice. Despite her fear, despite being heavily pregnant and far from any family, she was demanding to face the truth rather than hide from it. She's right, Jake. Tell her what you told me. Morrison glanced between them, then nodded. Miss Wells, I won't lie to you. This man is dangerous, and he's actively hunting for you, but the good news is that legally you're in the clear. The marriage wasn't valid, you've committed no crimes, and he's the one with warrants out for his arrest. That won't stop him from coming, Nora said quietly. No, ma'am, it probably won't, but it means when he does, we'll be ready for him. Morrison's hand brushed his badge, the silver star catching the afternoon light. I've already sent word to my deputies to be on the lookout, and Cole here tells me you're planning to stay put rather than run again. Nora glanced down at Cole, something passing between them that made the sheriff's eyebrows rise slightly. Yes, she said, I'm tired of running, and I won't let fear make decisions for my child anymore. That's wise, Morrison said. Men like Briggs count on fear to keep their victims compliant. Standing your ground with good people around you is your best chance at ending this permanently. After the sheriff left, Cole and Nora stood together on the porch, watching the dust cloud from his horse fade into the distance. The afternoon sun was gentler now, casting long shadows across the ranch yard where Cole's men went about their daily work. Are you frightened? Cole asked quietly. Terrified, Nora admitted, but also relieved. In a strange way. For months, I've been looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. At least now I know he's coming, and I'm not facing it alone. Cole turned to study her profile, noting the way she held herself, straight-backed despite her advanced pregnancy, her chin lifted with quiet defiance. You're stronger than you know, he said. I have to be. This baby deserves a mother who fights. For her future, not one who spends her life running from the past. That evening, as Cole made his rounds, checking the security of the ranch, he reflected on how much had changed since he'd found Nora on that dusty road. His carefully ordered solitary life had been turned upside down, filled with complications he'd spent years avoiding. Yet as he thought about her quiet courage, her determination to protect her unborn child, he realized he wouldn't trade this disruption for all the peaceful solitude in Texas. Some things, he was beginning to understand, were worth fighting for. The baby blanket began as an accident. Nora had been sitting in the parlor, trying to mend a tear in one of her borrowed dresses, when her needle slipped and drew blood from her finger. As she pressed a scrap of cloth to the small wound, she found herself studying the fabric. Soft, cotton in a pale yellow that reminded her of spring sunshine. That would make a lovely baby blanket, Maria observed, entering with fresh tea and biscuits. The color is perfect, suitable for either a son or daughter. Nora looked down at the fabric with new eyes. In all her months of pregnancy, she'd been so focused on survival that she'd given little thought to preparing for the baby's arrival. Now, for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine holding her child, wrapping the tiny form in something made with her own hands and filled with love rather than fear. I haven't done much sewing lately, she admitted, but I suppose I could try. I have more fabric upstairs, Maria said eagerly. And thread, needles, whatever you need. It would be good to keep your hands busy. Over the following days, the blanket became Nora's constant companion. She worked on it in the mornings while Cole tended to ranch business, in the afternoons while Maria prepared meals, and in the evenings as the three of them sat together in the parlor. The repetitive motion of stitching soothed her nerves and gave her restless energy a productive outlet. Cole often watched her work, though he tried to be subtle about it. She'd catch him glancing up from his ledgers or his own mending, his eyes following the movement of her needle with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. My mother made blankets, he said one evening, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over them. She said every stitch was a prayer for the child. Who would use it? Nora's hands stilled. What was she like? Strong, practical, she could deliver a calf, cure a fever, and make the best apple pie in 3 counties all in the same day. His voice carried the warmth of cherished memory. She died when I was 19, pneumonia that came on sudden-like. My father followed her 6 months later. Some said it was his heart, but I think he just couldn't figure out how to live without her. I'm sorry, Nora said softly. They sound like they loved each other very much. 32 years together. Never heard them raise their voices to each other, not once. He paused, then added quietly, I thought I'd have that kind of marriage with Katie. It was the most he'd ever said about his late wife, and Nora sensed the trust it represented. How long were you married? 3 years. She died giving birth to our son. He only lived 2 days. The words came out flat, matter of fact, but Nora could hear the old pain beneath them. Oh, Cole. She set down her sewing and reached across the space between their chairs to touch his hand. I'm so sorry. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused from years of hard work. It's been 5 years now. Most days I can remember the good times without the grief overwhelming everything else, but sometimes the missing hits you like a physical blow. Nora finished for him. I understand. They sat in silence for a while. Her hand in his, both lost in memories of losses that had shaped them. Finally, Cole spoke again. Is that why you're not afraid of childbirth? Because you've already lost so much that one more risk doesn't matter? Nora considered the question carefully. No, she said finally. I'm terrified of childbirth. Every woman is, if she's honest. But I'm more afraid of letting fear steal this joy from me. This baby. She placed her free hand on her belly, where the child was moving restlessly. This baby is the first purely good thing that's happened to me in 2 years. I won't let Jeremiah's shadow fall across that. Cole's thumb traced across her knuckles, a gentle caress that sent warmth spreading up her arm. The baby's lucky to have you for a mother. And you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Too personal and loaded with implications. She wasn't sure she was ready to face. Cole's eyes met hers across the small space between them. And me? What? Nothing, she said quickly, trying to pull her hand away, but he held it gently. Ask me, he said quietly. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. Will you, when the baby comes, will you help me love this child enough to make up for not having a father? Something shifted in Cole's expression, a wall coming down that she hadn't even realized was there. Nora, he said, his voice rough with emotion, that baby will never lack for love or protection as long as I draw breath. I promise you that. The weight of that promise settled between them, changing something fundamental in their relationship. They were no longer just rescuer and rescued, no longer just temporary allies against a common threat. They were becoming something else, something that didn't yet have a name, but felt as real and solid as the Texas earth beneath their feet. That night, as Nora worked on the baby blanket by lamplight, she found herself stitching not just fabric, but hope itself into every careful seam. For the first time since learning she was pregnant, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with more than mere survival. A future where her child would know safety, love, and the steady presence of a good man who understood that families could be built on more than just blood and law. The church social was Maria's idea, though she presented it with the careful diplomacy of someone who understood the delicate nature of the situation. It would be good for you to meet the other women, she told Nora over breakfast, and for them to see you as you truly are, not as gossip has painted you. Cole looked up from his coffee, frowning. What gossip? Maria and Nora exchanged glances. Nothing serious, Maria said quickly. Just the usual small-town curiosity about a stranger. Mrs. Henderson has been inquiring about Senora Nora's circumstances. What kind of inquiring? Cole's voice had taken on the edge it got when he was displeased. The kind that wonders how a respectable rancher comes to be harboring an unmarried woman in a delicate condition. Nora said quietly. I've been expecting it. Cole's jaw tightened. What people think isn't your concern. But it's yours, Nora replied. You have to live in this community long after I'm gone. Your reputation matters for your business, your standing. You're not going anywhere, Cole interrupted, then seemed to realize how that sounded. I mean, not until you're ready, not until it's safe. The church social was held in the schoolhouse, a modest building that served multiple purposes for the scattered community. When Cole helped Nora down from the wagon, she felt the weight of curious stares from the dozen or so families already gathered. Her borrowed dress, one of the better ones from the mysterious trunk Cole had brought down from storage, fit reasonably well despite her advanced pregnancy, but she still felt conspicuous. Remember, Maria whispered as they approached the building, you belong here as much as anyone. The land deed, tucked safely in Cole's vest pocket, seemed to radiate reassurance. He'd shown it to her the night before, the official document that proved his ownership of the ranch, his place in this community. This land has been in my family for 15 years, he'd said. My father built the foundation, and I've expanded it. No one questions my right to be here, and they shouldn't question my right to offer shelter to someone in need. Inside the schoolhouse, tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes. The air was filled with the mingled aromas of cornbread, roasted chicken, and apple pie. Children played in corners, while their parents gathered in conversational clusters that seemed to shift and reform based on invisible social currents. Reverend Matthews, a kind man in his 60s, greeted them warmly. Cole, good to see you. And, this must be Miss Wells. Maria has told us so much about you. Reverend, Nora replied, grateful for his genuine smile. Thank you for welcoming me. The first hour passed pleasantly enough. Nora found herself talking with Sarah Chen, the young Chinese wife of a neighboring rancher, who spoke softly about the challenges of being an outsider in a close-knit community. People mean well, Sarah said, but sometimes their curiosity feels like judgment. It was when Cole stepped outside to check on the horses that the trouble began. Martha Henderson approached with 2 other women in tow, their expressions carefully neutral but their intentions clear. Miss Wells, Martha said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, we've all been so curious about your story. It's unusual for a young woman to be traveling alone in your condition. Where did you say you were? From? I didn't, Nora replied politely, her hand instinctively moving to her belly, where the baby stirred restlessly. Oh, Martha's smile faltered slightly. Well, surely you don't mind sharing. We're all friends here. Martha, Sarah Chen said quietly, perhaps Miss Wells would prefer not to discuss personal matters. Nonsense, said Eleanor Price, one of Martha's companions. We're simply being neighborly. After all, when someone arrives under such mysterious circumstances, people naturally wonder. The word mysterious hung in the air, like an accusation. Nora felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. The only mystery, said a woman Nora hadn't met, is why Christian women would corner a pregnant stranger with intrusive questions instead of offering her Christian charity. The speaker was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that brooked no nonsense. She moved to stand beside Nora with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Mrs. Dalton, Martha said stiffly, we were simply being busybodies, Mrs. Dalton finished. Miss Wells, I'm Rebecca Dalton. My husband and I run the general store in town. If these ladies are too poorly raised to welcome you properly, then I'll have to make up for their lacking. The confrontation drew attention from across the room. Nora saw Cole re-enter the building, his eyes immediately finding the cluster of women and reading the tension in their postures. Is there a problem? Here? His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. No problem at all, Mrs. Dalton said brightly. I was just telling Miss Wells how pleased we are to have her in our community, weren't we, Martha? Martha Henderson's face had gone red, whether from embarrassment or anger. Nora couldn't tell. "Of course," she said through gritted teeth. "We were just getting acquainted." Cole moved to Nora's side, his presence both protective and possessive. "Miss Wells has been through enough without being subjected to interrogation," he said quietly. "I'd appreciate it if people remembered their manners." The remainder of the social passed without incident, but the damage was done. As they rode home in the wagon, Nora felt the weight of the community's divided opinion. Some, like Mrs. Dalton and Reverend Matthews, had offered genuine welcome. Others, like Martha Henderson, clearly viewed her as a threat to their ordered world. "I'm sorry," she said to Cole as the ranch house came into view. "I've made things difficult for you." Cole was quiet for a long moment, then said, "My mother used to say that you could judge a person's character by how they treated those who were down on their luck. Today, a lot of people showed their true character. Some I'm proud to call neighbors. Others," he shrugged, "others I'll remember next time they come asking for favors." That night, as Nora worked on her baby blanket, she reflected on the day's events. She'd faced down judgment and found unexpected allies. More importantly, she'd seen Cole defend her publicly, claiming her place in his life before the entire community. It was a step that couldn't be taken back, a declaration that changed everything between them. The evening after the church social, Cole found Nora sitting alone on the front porch, her unfinished baby blanket forgotten in her lap as she stared out at the star-filled sky. The night air carried the scent of sage and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night, but there was a melancholy in her posture that made him pause in the doorway. "Mind if I join you?" he asked quietly. She looked up, offering a small smile that didn't quite hide the sadness in her eyes. "Of course, it's your porch." He settled into the chair beside her, noting how she'd wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "You've been quiet since we got back. The social didn't go the way you hoped." "It went exactly as I expected," she replied, then sighed. I keep forgetting that I'm not the same person I was before Jeremiah. Before all of this, I used to be able to walk into a room and belong there. Now I feel like I'm wearing a sign that says, 'Damaged goods.'" Cole was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "You want to know what I saw today?" She turned to look at him, curiosity replacing some of the sadness. "I saw a woman who faced down Martha Henderson's nosiness with grace and dignity. I saw someone who didn't back down or make excuses for existing. I saw strength." "I felt terrified," Nora admitted, "and angry. When she kept pushing for details about my past, I wanted to tell her exactly what kind of man I was running from, just to see the look on her face." "Why didn't you?" "Because your reputation doesn't deserve to be dragged down by association with my sordid history." She picked up the baby blanket, running her fingers over the soft fabric. "You've given me so much. Safety, kindness, a place to heal. The least I can do is try not to create more problems for you." Cole reached into his vest pocket and withdrew something that gleamed gold in the moonlight. It was a pocket watch, heavy and well-worn, its surface engraved with initials that had been polished smooth by decades of handling. "This was my father's," he said, holding it carefully in his palm. "His father gave it to him, and his father. Before that, 4 generations of Maddox men have carried this watch." Nora leaned closer to examine it, noting the careful craftsmanship and the way Cole's hands cradled it like something precious. "It's beautiful. My father used to say that. Time was the only thing a man truly owned. Not land, not cattle, not even family. Those could all be taken away. But time, the moments we choose to spend and how we spend them, that's ours to control." He clicked the watch open, revealing a face that still kept perfect time despite its age. "He told me that the measure of a man wasn't in what he accumulated, but in how he chose to spend his moments." "Why are you telling me this?" Cole closed the watch and looked at her directly. "Because I want you to understand something. Every moment I've spent with you, every day you've been here, has been my choice. Not obligation, not charity. Choice. You haven't imposed on my life, Nora. You've enriched it. The words hung between them, loaded with implications that made Nora's heart race. Cole, I know it's complicated, he continued, his voice soft but steady. I know there are a dozen reasons why this doesn't make sense. You're still healing. From what Briggs put you through, you're about to have a baby. There's danger coming that we still have to face. But I need you to know that when I look at you, I don't see damaged goods. I see a woman who fought her way out of hell to protect her child. I see someone who makes Maria laugh again, who brought life back to Katie's garden, who sits on my porch in the evening and makes this house feel like a home again. Tears slipped down Nora's cheeks before she could stop them. You don't know everything about me, about what I had to do to survive. I know enough. He reached over and gently took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in the gesture that had become familiar between them. I know you're brave and kind and stronger than you think you are. I know you make the best cornbread Maria's ever tasted, that you hum when you're working in the garden, and that you read to the baby every night before bed. You've noticed all that? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I've noticed everything about you, Nora Wells. The baby chose that moment to kick strongly enough that it was visible through her dress, making both of them laugh, despite the emotional weight of the conversation. Nora placed Cole's hand on her belly, and they both went still as another kick landed squarely against his palm. Strong, he murmured, wonder in his voice, just like the mother. They sat in comfortable silence, his hand resting on her belly as the baby settled down. When movement came again, it was gentler, as if the child was responding to the warmth and security of human touch. What happens now? Nora asked quietly. Now we take it one day at a time, Cole replied. We face whatever comes together, and we trust that the rest will sort itself out. And if Jeremiah comes? Cole's expression hardened. Then he'll learn that some things are worth fighting for. Later that night, as Nora lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling into sleep, she held Cole's pocket watch, which he'd quietly pressed into her hands, before bidding her good night. The steady tick seemed to echo her heartbeat, marking moments that felt precious in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. For the first time since fleeing Austin, she allowed herself to imagine a future that stretched beyond mere survival. A future where she might belong somewhere not just as a refugee seeking shelter, but as someone whose presence was genuinely wanted. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, but as she felt the baby stir gently within her, she decided that perhaps it was time to choose hope over fear. Dr. Samuel Harrison arrived at the ranch on a crisp October morning, his medical bag, and serious expression immediately putting everyone on edge. Cole had sent for him after Nora experienced what she'd described as unusual pains during the night, sharp, cramping sensations that had left her pale and shaken. It's probably nothing, she'd insisted, when Cole suggested summoning the doctor. Women have been having babies for thousands of years without doctors hovering over them. But Cole had seen the worry in Maria's eyes, and his own fear had made the decision for him. Now, as Dr. Harrison examined his medical journal, where he'd been recording notes about Nora's condition during his previous visits, Cole paced the parlor like a caged animal. The pains stopped hours ago, Maria reported, bringing the doctor fresh coffee. But she was frightened, and that frightened me. Dr. Harrison, a thoughtful man in his 50s who'd delivered half the babies in 3 counties, nodded as he made additional notes. At this stage of pregnancy, occasional discomfort is normal. But given Miss Wells's circumstances, the stress she's been under, the poor nutrition during her travel, we need to be cautious. Cole stopped pacing. What kind of caution? Bed rest for the next week at minimum. No lifting, no extended periods on her feet, and absolutely no travel. The doctor closed his journal and fixed Cole with a steady look. She's at a critical point. The baby could come early if she's not careful, and an early baby faces challenges that a full-term child doesn't. The words hit Cole like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on the external threat from Jeremiah Briggs that he'd barely considered the medical risks Nora faced, the memory of Katie's difficult labor, the way everything had gone wrong so quickly, crashed over him with renewed force. Will she be all right? The question came out rougher than he'd intended. Dr. Harrison's expression softened. Cole, I've known you since you were a boy. I delivered you for that matter, and I was there when you lost Katie and the baby. I understand your concern, but Miss Wells is not Katie. She's younger, stronger, and despite everything she's been through, she's fundamentally healthy. We just need to be careful. After the doctor left with strict instructions and promises to return in 3 days, Cole found himself standing outside Nora's room, afraid to go in. The fear that had been his constant companion since Katie's death felt magnified now, threatening to overwhelm the careful control he'd built around his emotions. He knocked softly and entered to find Nora propped up in bed, her baby blanket spread across her lap as she worked on the intricate border stitching. She looked up when he entered, and he saw his own worry reflected in her eyes. Dr. Harrison says I'm to be an invalid for the next week, she said, attempting lightness that didn't quite hide her concern. I told him I feel fine, but apparently my opinion doesn't count for much in medical matters. Cole pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down heavily. He's just being cautious. That's what we pay doctors for. Cole. Her voice was gentle but firm. You look like you've seen a ghost. What aren't you telling me? For a long moment, he stared at his hands, struggling with how much to reveal. Finally, he looked up at her. Katie had pains like yours. Early labor pains, the doctor called them. He told us to be careful, to rest, that everything would probably be fine. Understanding dawned in Nora's eyes, but it wasn't fine. She went into labor 6 weeks early. The baby was too small, too weak. And Katie, he swallowed hard. The bleeding wouldn't stop. There was nothing anyone could do. Nora set down her sewing and reached for his hand. I'm not Katie. She said softly, echoing the doctor's words, and this baby isn't that baby. What happened to them was tragic, but it doesn't mean the same thing will happen to us. But it could. The admission felt like tearing something open inside his chest. I've spent 5 years convincing myself that I could live with loss because I'd already survived the worst of it. But the thought of losing you, of losing this baby, he shook his head. I don't think I could survive it again. Then we won't let it happen. Her voice carried a quiet determination that made him look up at her. We'll follow the doctor's orders. I'll rest, I'll be careful, and when this baby comes, it will be healthy and strong because we did everything right. You can't promise that. No, she agreed. But I can promise that I'll fight for this child with everything I have. And I can promise that whatever happens, you won't face it alone. The simple sincerity of her words broke something loose in his chest. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. I love you, he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. I know it's too soon. I know the timing is terrible, but I needed you to know. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. I love you too, she whispered. I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid it would disappear if I said it out loud. It won't disappear, Cole said firmly. Whatever else happens, that's real. They sat together in the quiet afternoon. Light, her hand in his, both of them aware that they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Love, once acknowledged, changed everything. The stakes, the risks, the depth of potential loss. But it also brought a strength that neither had possessed alone. That evening, as Cole sat in his study reviewing ranch accounts, he found his concentration broken repeatedly by thoughts of Nora upstairs. Every creak of the house made him listen for sounds of distress. Every hour that passed felt both too long and too precious. He'd built his life around control, around managing risks and avoiding situations that could lead to the kind of devastation he'd experienced before. But love, he was learning, made cowards of careful men and heroes of ordinary ones. Whatever was coming, whether it was Jeremiah Briggs, complications with the birth, or simply the challenge of building a life together, he would face it. Because some things were worth the risk of everything. The wanted poster arrived with the morning mail, delivered by a nervous-looking postal clerk who seemed eager to be away from the Maddox ranch as quickly as possible. Cole found it among the usual correspondence, bills, livestock reports, and a letter from his banker in San Antonio, but the rough paper and crude printing of the poster stood out like a curse word in a prayer book. Wanted, Jeremiah Briggs. The photograph was grainy, but the face was unmistakably brutal. Heavy jaw, small, eyes that seemed to look right through the camera with cold calculation. Below the image, details of his crimes were laid out in stark black type. Fraud, assault, theft, and now the addition that made Cole's blood run cold. Suspected in the disappearance of his common-law wife, Nora Wells, believed to be carrying his child. Dios mío, Maria breathed over his shoulder, crossing herself as she read. He's telling people she's missing, that she didn't leave willingly. Cole's hands tightened on the paper. It's clever, he said grimly. If he can convince people that Nora was kidnapped or is being held against her will, he can position himself as the concerned husband trying to rescue his wife. But the sheriff knows the truth. Sheriff Morrison knows the truth. But this poster will travel to places where Morrison has no authority. It changes the game entirely. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made them both look up as Nora appeared, moving carefully but determinedly, despite Dr. Harrison's orders to rest. She'd been growing restless after 3 days of enforced bed rest, and Cole suspected she'd been listening at the top of the stairs. What changes the game? She asked, then saw the poster in Cole's hands. Her face went white. Oh. Cole moved quickly to steady her as she swayed slightly. Sit down, he ordered, guiding her to a chair. You're supposed to be resting. How can I rest when... She gestured at the poster, her voice rising. He's made me into a victim in his own story. Look at that wording. Disappearance of his common-law wife. He's painted himself as the wronged husband and me as either dead or a prisoner. Which gives him legal cover to rescue you, Cole said, understanding the full implications. If local law enforcement in other towns believes you've been kidnapped, they might actually help him. Maria poured Nora a cup of tea with hands that shook slightly. What do we do, senor? Before Cole could answer, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the window. 3 riders were coming up the main drive at a pace that suggested urgency rather than a social call. Cole recognized Sheriff Morrison's distinctive grey mare, but the other 2 riders were strangers. Jake's brought company, Cole observed, his hand instinctively moving to check that his sidearm was in place. Nora, go upstairs now. I'm not hiding in my room like a child. You're not hiding. You're protecting yourself and the baby. There's a difference. His voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. Please. Reluctantly, Nora made her way back upstairs, though Cole suspected she'd position herself where she could hear everything that transpired. Sheriff Morrison dismounted with his usual careful efficiency, but the tension in his shoulders told Cole this wasn't a routine visit. The 2 men with him wore badges from different jurisdictions, one from Austin, the other from a county Cole didn't recognize. Cole, Morrison said without his usual pleasantries. We need to talk. These gentlemen are Deputy Marshal Williams from Austin and Sheriff Garrett from Williamson County. They're here about the Briggs situation. Deputy Marshal Williams stepped forward, a lean man with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. Mr. Maddox, we understand you're currently providing shelter to a woman named Nora Wells. I am, Cole replied carefully. What's your interest in Miss Wells? We've received reports that she may be in danger, Sheriff Garrett said, producing a copy of the same wanted poster Cole had received. Her husband has filed a missing person report, claiming she was taken against her will by persons unknown. Her husband. Cole repeated, his voice level despite the anger building in his chest. You mean Jeremiah Briggs, the man who's wanted, and multiple warrants for fraud and assault? Marshal Williams nodded. The same, but regardless of his criminal status, if he's her legal husband and she's carrying his child, he has certain rights under the law. He's not her legal husband, Morrison interjected. I've already verified that the marriage was performed under false pretenses using fraudulent documents. That's a matter for the courts to decide, Garrett said. In the meantime, we need to speak with Miss Wells to verify her safety and ensure she's here voluntarily. Cole felt the familiar cold calculation that had served him well in business and crisis situations. Miss Wells is recovering from exhaustion and pregnancy complications. Her doctor has ordered complete rest. We're not here to cause distress, Williams said. But we do need to verify her condition and circumstances. 5 minutes, Mr. Maddox. Surely you can understand our position. From upstairs came the sound of a door opening and careful footsteps on the stairs. Nora appeared in the parlor doorway, dressed in one of her borrowed dresses and moving with deliberate care. Her face was pale but determined. Gentlemen, she said with quiet dignity, I understand you have questions about my welfare. I'm here voluntarily, under the protection of Mr. Maddox, because I fled an abusive situation. Jeremiah Briggs is not my husband. Our marriage was a fraud performed with false documents. I have the legal right to be here, and I choose to be here. The silence that followed her statement stretched for several seconds. Finally, Marshal Williams cleared his throat. Miss Wells, are you making this statement of your own free will? Are you under any duress or coercion? The only duress I've experienced was at the hands of Jeremiah Briggs, Nora replied firmly. Mr. Maddox saved my life and has shown me nothing but kindness and respect. Sheriff Garrett exchanged glances with the marshal. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come to town and make an official statement. There are procedures. No. Cole's voice cut through the request like a blade. Miss Wells is under doctor's orders for complete rest. Any statements can be taken here with witnesses present, or they can wait until her doctor clears her for travel. The tension in the room was palpable as the three lawmen considered their options. Finally, Marshal Williams nodded slowly. Very well. We'll arrange for a statement to be taken here tomorrow with proper witnesses and documentation. But understand, Mr. Maddox, this situation is far from resolved. Briggs has resources and connections we're still learning about. After the lawmen left, Cole found himself staring out the window at the dust cloud from their departure. The net was tightening around them, and Jeremiah Briggs was proving more cunning than any of them had anticipated. He's not going to give up, Nora said quietly from behind him. No, Cole agreed, but neither are we. The loaded rifle leaning against Cole's bedroom wall had become a constant presence, cleaned and ready each night before he slept. He'd positioned it where he could reach it quickly in the darkness, and the weight of its necessity pressed against his consciousness like a stone in his chest. It wasn't just preparation anymore, it was a promise. 3 days had passed since the visit from the marshals, and the official statement had been taken with all proper procedures observed. Nora had been clear and composed, her account documented by a court clerk brought specially from town. But instead of providing closure, the legal formalities had only seemed to emphasize how precarious their situation remained. Tom Brennan, Cole's foreman for the past 8 years, knocked on the study door that evening as Cole reviewed security arrangements for what felt like the 100th time. Tom was a weathered man in his 50s, reliable as sunrise and twice as steady, with the kind of loyalty that couldn't be bought but had to be earned through years of fair treatment and mutual respect. "Boss, got a minute?" Tom asked, settling into the chair across from Cole's desk without waiting for an invitation. "The boys and I been talking about this Briggs fellow and what's likely to happen when he shows up." Tom leaned forward, his expression serious. "We all heard what the sheriff said about him having resources and connections. Word from town is that he's been asking questions. offering money for information about the ranch, about Miss Nora's condition and whereabouts. Cole set down his pen. What kind of questions? How many men we got working here? What kind of defenses we might have? Whether there's back ways onto the property? Smart questions from someone who's thinking tactical-like. Tom paused, then added, Jack Morrison's boy works at the telegraph office. Says there's been messages going back and forth between here and Austin, and some heading east toward Louisiana. This ain't just one man with a grudge, boss. This feels organized. The information settled in Cole's stomach like cold lead. He'd been preparing for a confrontation with an angry, desperate man. The possibility that Jeremiah Briggs had backup changed everything. What are you thinking, Tom? I'm thinking the boys want to stand with you on this, all of them. Been talking it over, and we're agreed. Miss Nora's under our protection now, same as you are. Any man comes looking to hurt her or that baby's going to have to go through. All of us. Cole felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Ranch hands were independent by nature, loyal to their wages and fair treatment, but not necessarily willing to risk their lives for their employer's personal troubles. That his men were volunteering to stand against an unknown threat spoke to their character and their assessment of Nora's worth. I appreciate that, Tom, more than you know. But I won't ask any man to— You ain't asking, Tom interrupted. We're offering. Been working this ranch for years, and you've always treated us fair and square. Paid us good wages, never asked more than was reasonable, stood by us when times were hard. Now you need standing by, and we aim to provide it. That night, as Cole made his final rounds before bed, he found the ranch transformed. Men who usually disappeared into the bunkhouse after supper were positioned strategically around the property. Jake Wilson had volunteered for first watch at the main gate, while Pete Rodriguez took position near the horse corral, where he had clear sightlines in 3 directions. Even old Charlie Hayes, who was nearing 60 and should have been settling into retirement, had insisted on taking a shift watching the back approaches to the house. Cole found Nora in the parlor, working on her baby blanket by lamplight, despite Maria's protests that she should be resting. The project was nearly finished now, an intricate pattern of soft yellows and greens that seemed to glow in the warm light. Her stitches had grown more confident over the weeks, each section showing improvement over the last. You should be sleeping, he said gently, settling into the chair beside her. So should you, but I can hear you pacing upstairs at night, checking the windows, making sure the rifle is loaded. She set down her needle and looked at him directly. How many men does he have? Cole had learned not to try to shield her from harsh realities. We don't know for certain. Tom thinks at least 3 or 4, possibly more, and they're asking smart questions, which suggests experience. Experience with what? Violence? Probably the kind that comes from being on the wrong side of the law for years. He reached over and took her hand, noting how her fingers trembled slightly despite her outward calm. But Tom also told me something else tonight. Every man on this ranch has volunteered to stand with us, not because I asked them to, but because they want to. Tears gathered in Nora's eyes. They barely know me. They know enough. They see how you treat Maria with respect, how you've brought life back to parts of this ranch that had been neglected. They see that you make me— He paused, searching for the right words. They see that you make me better than I was alone. And if we lose, if Jeremiah comes with more men than we can handle— Cole's hand moved instinctively toward where his rifle waited upstairs. Then we'll make sure the cost is too high for him to pay. Men like Briggs are bullies at heart. They prefer easy victories to hard ones. If we make this fight expensive enough, he might decide you're not worth the price. And if he doesn't, then we'll finish it permanently. The words came out harder than he'd intended, carrying a finality that made Nora study his face carefully. You're talking about killing him. I'm talking about protecting what matters most to me. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I won't let him take you, Nora. I won't let him hurt you or the baby. Whatever that requires, I'll do it. Later, as they climbed the stairs together, Cole carrying the lamp to light their way, Nora paused at her bedroom door. Cole, When this is over, when Jeremiah is no longer a threat, what happens then? He set the lamp on the hallway table and turned to face her fully. Then we build the life we both want. We get married properly, raise this baby together, and maybe have more children if God wills it. We turn this ranch into the home it was always meant to be. You'd marry me. Even knowing everything about my past, about the mistakes I've made, especially knowing everything about your past. It's made you who you are, strong, brave, determined to protect the people you love. Those aren't flaws, Nora. They're the reasons I fell in love with you. As he watched her disappear into her room, Cole reflected on how much his life had changed since that day he'd found her collapsed by the roadside. He'd thought he was rescuing her, but increasingly he understood that she'd rescued him just as completely. Tomorrow would bring whatever challenges it brought, but tonight, for the first time in years, he fell asleep planning for a future instead of just surviving the present. The marriage certificate arrived in the most unlikely way, tucked inside. A worn leather satchel carried by a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Mary Catherine Sullivan dismounted from her exhausted horse with the careful movements of someone who'd ridden hard and long, her travel-stained dress and hollow. Speaking of desperation that matched Nora's own memories. "Please," she said when Cole approached her cautiously in the ranch yard, one hand resting on his sidearm. "I'm looking for a woman named Nora Wells. I heard she might be here." "Who's asking?" Cole's voice was carefully neutral, but Nora had appeared on the porch at the sound of an unfamiliar voice, and something about the stranger made her move closer, despite the obvious risk. "My name is Mary Catherine Sullivan. Until 3 days ago, I thought I was the wife of Jeremiah Briggs." The woman's voice broke slightly on the words. "But I've learned some things that change everything." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. "You're his wife. His real wife." Mary Catherine reached into her satchel with trembling hands and withdrew a folded document. "I thought I was. We were married 5 years ago in New Orleans, with proper papers and witnesses and everything legal. But when I went to the courthouse to get a copy of our marriage certificate to help with some legal troubles he's been having, I discovered something terrible." She held out the paper and Cole took it carefully, his eyes scanning the official document. As he read, his expression shifted from suspicion to amazement. "This marriage certificate," he said slowly, "is dated 2 months after the ceremony you went through with Jeremiah." Mary Catherine nodded miserably. "The clerk explained it to me. Jeremiah filed the paperwork under a false name, James Brennan, instead of Jeremiah Briggs. When the real James Brennan discovered the fraud and contested it, the marriage was declared invalid, null and void. Legally, I've never been married to him at all." Nora sank onto the porch steps, the implications washing over her like a flood. "But if your marriage wasn't legal and mine wasn't legal, then he's never been legally married." "And to anyone," Cole finished, understanding immediately. "Every woman he's married has been the victim of fraud." "There have been others," Mary Catherine said quietly. "I've been tracking them down, trying to warn them. Sarah Bennett in Dallas, Elizabeth Morrison in Fort Worth, and now you. All of us told the same lies, all of us believing we were his wife." Maria appeared with coffee and a plate of food, her maternal instincts overriding caution as she saw the exhausted state of their unexpected visitor. "Mija, you look ready to collapse. Sit, eat, rest yourself." As Mary Catherine gratefully accepted the refreshment, she continued her story. "I started investigating when I realized some of his business dealings weren't legitimate. What I found," she shuddered, "he's been running the same scheme for years. Find desperate women, marry them with false papers, take whatever they have of value, then disappear. But with you, Nora, something went wrong." "What do you mean?" "You didn't have money or property for him to steal, but you got pregnant, and that changed his plans. A baby meant leverage, meant he could control you permanently." Mary Catherine's voice grew harder. "I found letters he'd written to some unsavory A character's in Louisiana. He was planning to sell the baby. The words hit Nora like a physical blow. Cole moved quickly to her side, his arm supporting her as she swayed. Sell the baby. To families who pay well for healthy infants and don't ask questions about where they come from. It's more profitable than his usual schemes, and it explains why he's been so determined to find you. Mary Catherine reached into her satchel again and withdrew several more papers. I have evidence, correspondence, bank records, witness statements, enough to put him away for a very long time. Cole studied the documents with growing amazement. Why are you doing this? Why risk yourself to help women you don't even know? Mary Catherine's laugh was bitter. Because I was one of those women. Because I spent 5 years believing I was married to a man who never saw me as anything more than a mark to be exploited. Because I want to see him pay for what he's done to all of us. Does he know you've discovered the truth? He suspects. I had to leave New Orleans quickly when I realized he was becoming suspicious of my questions. I think he's planning something desperate, which is why I rode so hard to find you. If he can't get the baby through legal means, he'll try to take it by force, Cole finished grimly. But this changes everything, Nora said, her voice growing stronger as the full implications became clear. If he was never legally married to any of us, if there's evidence of his criminal activities, then the law is on our side completely, Cole agreed. No more questions about marital rights or custody claims. He's just a criminal trying to kidnap a child. Mary Catherine nodded. I've already contacted federal marshals in New Orleans. They're issuing new warrants based on the evidence I've provided. The problem is, those warrants haven't reached Texas yet, and Jeremiah doesn't know I've exposed him. He's still operating under the assumption that his old tactics will work. As evening approached, and they made arrangements for Mary Catherine to stay the night, Cole felt a grim satisfaction settling in his chest. The truth had a way of emerging at the most crucial moments, and this truth changed the entire nature of their conflict. Jeremiah Briggs wasn't a wronged husband seeking his wife and child. He was a criminal attempting to steal a baby for profit. That knowledge would make what was coming easier to bear. When the time came to fight, Cole would be defending more than just the woman he loved. He'd be protecting an innocent child from a monster who saw human life as nothing more than currency to be traded. The federal marshal's badge gleamed in the morning sunlight as Deputy Marshal James Crawford dismounted from his horse. His arrival, as unexpected as it was, welcome. He was a tall man with steel-grey hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with the worst humanity had to offer, but his eyes held a kindness that immediately put Nora at ease. Mrs. Sullivan sent word ahead, he explained after introductions were made. Asked me to ride hard to get here before Briggs made his move. Lucky for all of us, federal warrants move faster than local gossip. Cole invited him into the parlor, where Mary Catherine was already waiting with a pot of fresh coffee and the collection of evidence she'd gathered. Marshal Crawford settled into a chair and pulled out his own notebook, his manner both professional and reassuring. First things first, he said, looking directly at Nora. Miss Wells, you are not now, nor have you ever been, married to Jeremiah Briggs. The ceremony you went through was fraudulent from start to finish. You have no legal obligations to him whatsoever, and he has no legal claim to you or your child. The words, spoken with official authority, lifted a weight from Nora's shoulders that she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. I knew it wasn't real, she said quietly, but hearing it from a federal marshal makes it feel final. It is final, Crawford confirmed, but what's more important is what we've learned about Briggs's larger operation. Mrs. Sullivan's evidence has helped us connect him to a network of criminals operating across multiple states. He's not just a small-time fraud artist. He's part of something much bigger and much more dangerous. Mary Catherine leaned forward, her face grave. Tell them about the baby trafficking. Crawford's expression darkened. Briggs has been working with a group that specializes in acquiring infants for wealthy families who don't want to go through legal adoption channels. They pay premium prices for healthy babies, especially those with light complexions and no official birth records. Your child, Miss Wells, would have been worth a considerable sum to them. Cole's hand clenched into a fist on the arm of his chair. How many babies are we talking about? At least a dozen that we can prove, probably more. The operation spans from Louisiana to California, with Briggs handling the acquisition end of things. He targets vulnerable women, gets them pregnant through his fake marriages, then takes the children after birth. The women usually disappear shortly after. The casual way he said disappear made Nora's blood run cold. You mean he kills them? Can't prove that yet. But given that none of the other women have ever been seen again, Crawford left the sentence unfinished. But this changes everything about how we handle the situation, Cole said, understanding the implications immediately. When Briggs comes, and he will come, we're not dealing with a domestic dispute anymore. We're dealing with federal crimes. Exactly. Which means when he shows up, you have full federal authority to defend yourselves by any means necessary. More importantly, I have backup coming. A full federal team should arrive within the next 2 days. 2 days, Nora repeated. Will he wait that long? Crawford exchanged glances with Mary Catherine. That's the concerning part. Mrs. Sullivan's investigation has made him nervous. We have reason to believe he's accelerated his timeline. Intelligence suggests he's planning to move against you within the next day or two, before any federal intervention can stop him. So we're back to the original plan, Cole said grimly. Defend the ranch until help arrives. With one crucial difference, Crawford said, reaching into his vest and producing an official-looking document. This is a federal protection order. It gives you legal authority to use deadly force in defense of Miss Wells and her unborn child. No questions asked, no legal consequences. Jeremiah Briggs is now classified as an armed and dangerous federal fugitive, and anyone acting with him is considered equally dangerous. The marshal's badge caught the light again as Crawford leaned back in his chair, and Nora found herself staring at it. All these months, she'd thought of herself as a victim, running from a bad marriage. Now she understood she'd actually been fleeing a criminal organization that viewed her unborn child as merchandise. There's something else, Mary Catherine said quietly. I received a telegram yesterday from a woman in El Paso, another one of Jeremiah's wives. She's pregnant too, and she's been hiding in a mission there. This isn't just about you anymore, Nora. If we can stop him here, we can save other women and children. The weight of that responsibility settled on the room like a heavy blanket. They weren't just fighting for their own future anymore. They were fighting to stop a criminal enterprise that had destroyed countless lives. When he comes, Cole said finally, how many men should we expect? Crawford consulted his notes. At least 4, possibly 6. They're experienced with violence and accustomed to intimidating isolated women, but they're not used to organized resistance from well-armed defenders. Then they're in for a surprise, Cole said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man who'd made his decision and found peace with it. That afternoon, as they made final preparations for what felt like an inevitable confrontation, Nora reflected on how completely her understanding of the situation had changed. She wasn't a runaway wife anymore. She was a federal witness under protection. Jeremiah wasn't a wronged husband. He was a dangerous criminal who targeted her for reasons that had nothing to do with love or marriage. The truth, she realized, had set her free in ways she'd never expected. Whatever was coming, she would face it not as a victim, but as a woman with the full weight of federal law behind her and good people willing to stand at her side. Maria found the wedding dress fabric buried in the bottom of an old cedar chest in the attic, wrapped carefully in tissue paper that had yellowed with age. She brought it down to the kitchen where Nora was trying to focus on mending despite the controlled chaos of defensive preparations happening around them. The fabric was ivory silk with delicate pearl buttons, enough to make a simple but elegant dress. I saved this from when Senora Catherine was planning her sister's wedding, Maria explained, smoothing the lustrous material with reverent hands. She ordered too much, and she told me to keep it for something special. I think she would want you to have it. Nora touched the silk gently, amazed by its softness. Maria, I can't take something so precious. This should be saved for someone in your family. Mia, Maria said firmly, you are family, and when this trouble is over, when Senor Cole makes you his wife properly, you will need a dress worthy of the occasion. The optimism in Maria's voice, her absolute certainty that they would survive what was coming, brought tears to Nora's eyes. Around them, the ranch had transformed into something approaching a military operation. Cole and Marshal Crawford had spent the morning positioning men at strategic points, checking ammunition supplies and establishing communication signals. Yet here was Maria, planning for weddings and happier times as if their future was already assured. Do you really think we'll get through this? Nora asked quietly. I have seen Senor Cole face down cattle rustlers, drought, bank foreclosures, and the death of everyone he loved, Maria replied, beginning to measure the fabric against Nora's frame. I have never seen him fail when he sets his mind to protecting something, and I have never seen him care about anything the way he cares about you. Through the kitchen window, they could see Cole and Tom Brennan positioning additional rifles in the barn loft, their movements efficient and purposeful. Marshal Crawford was checking the approaches to the ranch house, his professional eye assessing fields of fire and defensive positions with the expertise of someone who'd planned similar operations before. The baby's been restless all morning, Nora said, one hand moving to her belly where she could feel constant agitated movement. It's like she knows something's wrong. She? Maria raised an eyebrow. You think it's a girl? I dream about her sometimes. Dark hair like mine, but Cole's eyes, strong and stubborn and absolutely fearless. Nora smiled despite her worry. Though given the circumstances she's being born into, fearless might be a necessity rather than a choice. Mary Catherine appeared in the doorway, her face tense with news. Marshal Crawford just received a telegraph message. Jeremiah and his men were spotted at the way station in Millerville this morning. That's only 20 miles from here. The information sent a chill through the kitchen. 20 miles meant they could arrive by evening if they rode hard, or by morning if they approached more cautiously. How many? Nora asked, though part of her didn't want to know. 5 men, all armed, asking questions about the best routes to the Maddox Ranch. Mary Catherine sat down heavily in a chair. The station master said they looked like they meant business, professional, dangerous. Maria carefully folded the wedding dress fabric and placed it in a basket with thread and needles. Then we finish our preparations and trust in God and good. Men with rifles, she said pragmatically. Mija, you should rest while you can. If the baby decides to come during all this excitement, you'll need your strength. As if summoned by the mention of rest, Dr. Harrison arrived for his scheduled check on Nora's condition. His medical bag seemed almost absurdly ordinary amid the military preparations, but his presence provided a different kind of reassurance. The promise that whatever happened, proper care would be available. How are you feeling, Miss Wells? He asked as he conducted his examination. Any unusual pains or discomfort? The baby's been very active today, Nora admitted. More than usual. And I've had some cramping, but nothing severe. Dr. Harrison's expression grew thoughtful as he listened to the baby's heartbeat and checked Nora's general condition. The child's position has shifted, he said finally. I'd say you're probably within a week of delivery, possibly less. The stress of the current situation may be accelerating things. Cole, who had been standing quietly in the doorway, stepped forward. Is there anything we should be concerned about? Just the usual precautions. Keep her as calm as possible, ensure she gets adequate rest, and call me immediately if labor begins. Dr. Harrison packed his instruments with practiced efficiency. Given the circumstances, I'll plan to stay in town, rather than returning to my usual rounds. If you need me, send word immediately. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold, the ranch settled into an armed calm that felt like the held breath before a storm. Guards were posted at all approaches, signals established, and contingency plans reviewed. One final time. In the kitchen, Maria worked quietly on the wedding dress, her needle flying through the ivory silk as if she could sew hope itself into every seam. Nora sat with Cole on the front porch, watching the last light fade from the sky and trying to memorize the peaceful beauty of the moment. Tomorrow might bring violence and terror, but tonight there was still time for quiet conversation and the gentle pressure of his hand on hers. Whatever happens, Cole said quietly, I want you to know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. You've given me back something I thought was lost forever. What's that? The belief that the future could be better than the past. That love was worth the risk of loss. He turned to look at her, his face serious in the gathering darkness. Promise me something, Nora. If things go badly tomorrow, if I don't, she interrupted firmly. Don't you dare talk like that. We're going to get through this together, and then we're going to have that wedding Maria's planning. I've seen the dress fabric, and I'm not wasting good silk on a widow's weeds. Cole's laugh was soft but genuine. Yes, Ma'am. I suppose I'd better survive then. Can't have Maria's efforts going to waste. As they made their way inside for what might be their last peaceful night, Nora carried the image of that wedding dress fabric in her mind like a talisman. Some dreams were worth fighting for, and some hopes were strong enough to survive any storm. The baby's first blanket was finished. Just as the first labor pains began, Nora had worked through the night by lamplight, her hands moving steadily, despite the tension that filled the ranch house like electricity before a storm. The final stitches were completed as dawn painted the eastern horizon in shades of rose and gold, and she held up the finished work with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. The blanket was beautiful, soft yellow cotton bordered with intricate embroidery in pale green thread. Every stitch had been placed with love and hope, creating something that would wrap her child in warmth and the memory of these difficult but precious days. As she folded it carefully, the first contraction hit her like a wave, not painful yet, but unmistakably significant. Maria, she called softly, not wanting to wake the entire household but needing the older woman's wisdom. I think it's time. Maria appeared within moments, fully dressed despite the early hour. She'd been sleeping lightly for days, anticipating this possibility. One look at Nora's face told her everything she needed to know. How long between the ski? Pains? She asked, moving efficiently to time the contractions and assess the situation. About 15 minutes, I think. They started maybe an hour ago, but I wasn't sure at first. Nora gripped the finished blanket like an anchor. Maria, what if the baby comes right when Jeremiah arrives? What if then this child will be born into a world where people are fighting to protect her, Maria said firmly. And that's not such a bad beginning, Mija. Many children are born into indifference. This one will know from her first breath that she's worth defending. Cole appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, but his eyes immediately alert. Is it starting? Si, senor. Early labor, but real labor. The baby has decided not to wait for a more convenient time. Maria's tone held both resignation and a peculiar satisfaction, as if she approved of the child's timing, despite its complications. Cole ran a hand through his hair, calculating rapidly. Dr. Harrison is in town. I can send Tom to fetch him, but if Briggs and his men are as close as we think, we may have to manage without him, Nora finished, understanding the dilemma immediately. Sending a rider to town would weaken their defenses and potentially alert Jeremiah to their situation if his men were watching the roads. Marshal Crawford arrived in the kitchen, drawn by the unusual activity. When the situation was explained, to him his expression grew thoughtful. Early labor can take many hours, he said. If we're lucky, this baby won't arrive until after we've dealt with Briggs. But we need to be prepared for all possibilities. "What do you mean?" Cole asked. "I mean, if the confrontation happens while Miss Wells is in active labor, she'll need to be moved to the safest location possible. The root cellar, perhaps, or the interior room with the thickest walls, somewhere bullets can't reach her." The practical nature of the discussion, planning for gunfire while a baby was being born, struck Nora as surreal. Yet it was their reality, and she found herself grateful for the marshal's matter-of-fact approach to managing an impossible situation. Another contraction gripped her, stronger this time, and she breathed through it with the careful control Dr. Harrison had taught her during his visits. When it passed, she looked around at the three people who had become her family in these short weeks. "I need you all to promise me something," she said quietly. "If it comes down to choosing between saving me and saving the baby, you save the baby. Do you understand? This child is innocent in all of this. She deserves her chance at life." "Nora," Cole started to protest, but she cut him off. "Promise me," she insisted, her voice carrying an authority that came from somewhere deep inside her. "I won't bring a child into this world just to have her orphaned because people were too sentimental to make hard choices." Cole knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I promise you something better," he said fiercely. "I promise that both of you are going to survive this. Both of you are going to live to see tomorrow and next week and next year. I don't care what it takes." Mary Catherine appeared in the kitchen, her face tense with news. "Riders on the horizon," she reported, "still distant, but definitely coming this way. 5 men, moving carefully, not in any hurry." Marshal Crawford nodded grimly. "They're taking their time, probably scouting the approaches. Professional caution. We've got maybe 2 hours before they arrive, assuming they don't spot our defenses and decide to wait for nightfall." 2 hours, Nora repeated, then gasped as another contraction hit. They were definitely getting stronger and closer together. Nature, it seemed, had its own timeline that didn't care about human conflicts. Cole stood and moved to the window, where he could see his ranch hands taking their positions with the calm efficiency of men who'd faced danger before. Tom's got the barn secured, Pete's watching the north approach, and Jake's got eyes on the main road. "Everyone knows the signals, and the baby decides to join the fight," Maria said with dark humor, timing Nora's contractions. 10 minutes apart now. This child has dramatic timing, like her mother. As the morning light strengthened and the riders drew slowly closer, the ranch house became a place where life and death preparations proceeded side by side. In one room, Cole and Crawford checked weapons and reviewed defensive positions. In another, Maria prepared clean linens and hot water for a birth that might happen in the middle of a gunfight. Nora sat in the center of it all, one hand on her belly feeling the baby's restless movements, the other clutching the blanket she'd finished just in time. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine not just her fate, but the kind of world her child would be born into. She closed her eyes and felt the strength that had carried her this far rise up once more. Some battles, she realized, were worth fighting regardless of the odds, and some futures were worth defending even when the cost might be everything you had to give. Cole's father's gun had been passed down through 3 generations of Maddox men, its walnut grip worn smooth by decades of honest hands. As Cole checked the cylinder one final time, he thought about his grandfather, who'd carried it during the Indian Wars, and his father, who'd used it to defend their first cattle from rustlers. Now it would serve its purpose once more, protecting the family that mattered most. The riders had stopped just beyond rifle range, close enough to be clearly seen, but far enough away to avoid immediate confrontation. Through his field glasses, Cole could make out 5 men, all armed, all sitting, their horses with the confidence of men accustomed to violence. The largest of them, a heavy-set man with a black beard, had to be Jeremiah Briggs. "He's studying our defenses," Marshal Crawford observed, his own rifle resting across his knee as he watched from the parlor window. "Smart, probably counting. Our men looking for weaknesses." From upstairs came the sound of Nora trying to muffle a cry as another contraction hit. Labor was progressing faster than anyone had expected, and Dr. Harrison was still in town, unreachable without compromising their position. "He can study all he wants," Cole said grimly. "He's not getting near this house." As if hearing his words, one of the riders detached himself from the group and approached slowly, a white cloth tied to his rifle barrel. Cole recognized the man. From wanted posters, Jeremiah Briggs himself, playing at parley while his men spread out to flank the ranch house. "Maddox!" Briggs called when he was close enough to be heard clearly. "I've come for what's mine. Send out my wife and child, and there'll be no trouble." Cole stepped onto the front porch, his father's gun holstered but visible, his stance radiating the quiet confidence of a man defending his own ground. "Jeremiah Briggs," he called back, "you're a wanted man with federal warrants out for your arrest. You have no wife, no child, and no claim to anything on this property. Turn around and ride away, and you might live to see another sunrise." Briggs laughed, the sound carrying an edge of madness that made Cole's skin crawl. "I know she's in there, Maddox. I can practically smell her fear from here. 5 years I invested in that woman, and I aim to get my return. The baby she's carrying is worth more money than you've ever seen." "Money?" Cole's voice carried across the distance, loaded with disgust. "You're talking about selling a child like livestock. I'm talking about a business transaction, something you ranchers should understand." Briggs shifted in his saddle, and Cole caught the movement of his men taking positions. "Last chance, Maddox. Send her out, or we'll come in and take her." The response came not from Cole, but from Marshal Crawford, who stepped onto the porch, with his badge clearly visible and his rifle held ready. "Jeremiah Briggs, you're under federal arrest for fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Surrender now, and you'll live to stand trial." Briggs' face darkened with rage. "Federal Marshal, well, ain't that something?" He raised his voice to address his men. "Looks like we got ourselves a real fight, boys. Remember, the woman's worth nothing to us dead, but everyone else is fair game." That was when the shooting started. Briggs spurred his horse toward the house while simultaneously drawing his pistol. Cole's father's gun was in his hand, and firing before conscious thought could intervene, the familiar weight and balance allowing muscle memory to guide his aim. Briggs jerked in his saddle as the bullet caught him in the shoulder, but he kept coming. From the barn came the sharp crack of Tom Brennan's rifle, and one of the flanking riders tumbled from his horse. Pete Rodriguez opened fire from the north side of the house, his shots driving another attacker into cover behind a water trough. The sound of gunfire was deafening, but through it all, Cole could hear Nora crying out from upstairs as another contraction hit. The baby was coming whether there was a gunfight or not, and Maria was up there trying to manage a birth, while bullets shattered windows throughout the house. Marshal Crawford's rifle spoke with methodical precision, each shot carefully aimed, and devastating in its effect. Another of Briggs' men went down, this one not getting back up, but Briggs himself had reached the porch, and Cole found himself facing the man who'd terrorized the woman he loved. "You son of a bitch!" Briggs snarled, blood streaming from his wounded shoulder as he raised his pistol. "You think you can steal what's mine?" "She was never yours," Cole replied, and pulled the trigger. The shot took Briggs' center mass, the heavy bullet from the old Colt, driving him backward off the porch. He hit the ground hard and lay still, his pistol falling from nerveless fingers. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader down and facing disciplined fire from multiple positions, broke and ran. Jake Wilson's rifle from the corral sent them on their way faster, and within moments the ranch yard was quiet except for the ringing echoes of gunfire. Cole holstered his father's gun and ran for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. He burst into Nora's room to find Maria supporting her through another contraction, both women's faces reflecting the stress of the past few minutes. "It's over," he said breathlessly. "Briggs is dead. The others ran." "Good," Nora panted between contractions, "because this baby isn't waiting any longer. She's coming now." Outside, Marshal Crawford was checking bodies and securing the scene. Inside, life was asserting itself with an urgency that brooked no delay. Cole took Nora's hand, amazed by her strength as she squeezed his fingers through another contraction. "I can see the head," Maria announced with professional calm. "One more push, Misha. Your daughter is ready to meet the world," as Nora bore down with the final effort of bringing life into the world. Cole reflected on the strange symmetry of the moment. Death had been driven from their door, just as new life arrived to take its place. His father's gun had played its part in the old story, but now it was time for new stories to begin. The new birth certificate lay on Dr. Harrison's desk, the ink still wet as he filled in the final details. Baby Catherine Rose Maddox had entered the world at 11:47 in the morning, healthy and strong despite the dramatic circumstances of her arrival. When the doctor had asked for the father's name, Cole had answered without hesitation, and Nora had squeezed his hand in grateful agreement. "She's perfect," Nora whispered, cradling her daughter against her chest as the baby nursed contentedly. The yellow blanket she'd finished that morning was wrapped around them both, creating a cocoon of warmth and safety. "Look at her hands, Cole. So tiny, but so strong." Cole sat on the edge of the bed, one finger gently stroking the baby's dark hair. She had Nora's coloring, but something about her eyes, when they briefly opened, reminded him of his own family. Whether genetics or wishful thinking, it didn't matter. This child was his daughter in every way that counted. "Catherine Rose Maddox," he said softly, testing how the name sounded. "After my mother and Katie, if that's all right with you." "It's perfect," Nora agreed. "She'll have strong women to live up to." Through the window, they could see Marshall Crawford supervising the removal of Jeremiah Briggs's body while his deputies rounded up the surviving members of the criminal gang. The federal investigation would continue, but their part in it was essentially over. Justice, swift and final, had been served. Dr. Harrison knocked softly before entering, his medical bag in hand for a final check on both mother and child. "How are we feeling, Miss Wells?" "Mrs. Maddox," Cole corrected firmly. "We'll be married as soon as you clear her for travel to town." Dr. Harrison smiled as he examined the baby, checking reflexes and breathing with practiced efficiency. "Well, Mrs. Maddox, you've given birth to a remarkably healthy daughter under remarkably difficult circumstances. I'd say you're both ready to begin your new life whenever you choose." Maria appeared in the doorway with a tray of fresh tea and the kind of nourishing soup she insisted new mothers required. Behind her came Mary Catherine, her face bright with joy and relief. "She's beautiful," Mary Catherine said, peering at the baby with wonder. "After everything we've been through, to see something so perfect and innocent, what will you do now?" Nora asked. "With Jeremiah gone, you're free to rebuild your life, however you choose." Mary Catherine settled into a chair, accepting tea from Maria with grateful hands. "Marshall Crawford has offered me a position helping other women who've been victimized by schemes like Briggs. Apparently, my experience and the evidence I've gathered make me uniquely qualified to help federal investigators understand how these operations work." "That sounds like important work," Cole observed. "It is, and it means I can help ensure that other women don't go through what we did." Mary Catherine smiled at the baby, who had finished nursing and was now sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "Besides, someone needs to keep an eye on this little one as she grows up. Make sure she knows how brave her mother was." Later that afternoon, as the ranch settled back into its normal rhythm, Cole found himself on the front porch where this story had begun. The damage from the morning's gunfight was minimal. A few broken windows, some bullet holes in the barn. Siding, nothing that couldn't be repaired. But the psychological landscape had changed completely. The shadow that had hung over them for weeks was gone, replaced by the bright promise of a future they could build together. Reverend Matthews arrived as the sun was setting, having ridden out as soon as word reached town about the baby's birth and the resolution of the crisis. He'd brought his wife, who came bearing gifts of baby clothes and offers of practical help. "I understand. There might be a wedding to plan," the Reverend said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Nothing I like better than celebrating new life and new beginnings." "As soon as possible," Cole confirmed. "We've waited long enough to make this official." That evening, as the household settled into the peaceful routine of caring for a newborn, Cole sat in his study, updating the ranch ledgers. But instead of the usual entries about cattle and feed costs, he found himself writing different kinds of notes: plans for expanding the house to accommodate a growing family, ideas for improving the children's room, dreams that had seemed impossible just that morning. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Nora appeared, moving carefully but steadily, with baby Catherine sleeping in her arms. "I wanted to show her where her father works," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "And to thank you for writing your name on that birth certificate, for claiming us as your own." Cole set down his pen and looked at the two people who had transformed his life so completely. "I should be thanking you," he said, "for bringing love back into this house, for giving me a reason to believe in tomorrow again." "What happens now?" Nora asked, echoing the question she'd posed weeks earlier under very different circumstances. "Now we live," Cole replied simply. "We raise our daughter, we build our marriage, and we trust that the worst is behind us. We take each day as it comes, and remember that some things are worth fighting for." Outside, the Texas stars appeared, one by one in the clear night sky, watching over a ranch where peace had finally come to stay. Inside, a new family began the first night of what they hoped would be a very long and happy life together. And somewhere in the distance, the future stretched out before them like an unwritten story, full of possibilities they were only beginning to imagine.